We may have people, as you'll have seen, you'll have gotten a notification that the session is being recorded. So just to emphasize that, I would like to introduce our speakers for this session. Each speaker will have 20 minutes and their paper will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A. So if you have questions for the speaker, please put them into the chat and I'll try to get as many as possible sent to the speaker in the 10-minute session after their paper. We're looking forward to a really good session on, we'll be hearing from the speakers in this order. We have Anastasia Umarova from Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, speaking about how do past feedback experiences influence the use of feedback in postgraduate coursework students. Then we'll be hearing Karen Lander from the University of Manchester, supporting students with resits and interruption, challenges for student engagement. And we'll be finishing off with Grace Thompson from the University of Melbourne, balancing challenge with care, students' perceptions of classroom-based experiential learning in vocational postgraduate degrees. So let's start with Anastasia, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'll share my screen. And then this. Perfect. Thank you again, Claire, for the introduction. My name is Anastasia, and so my research is about past feedback experiences, and I'm trying to explore in my project how they influence students' behavior in postgraduate courses. And today we'll talk specifically about feedback elicitation and why I will explain in a moment. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, where I'm physically placed, and I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And now to my presentation. Traditional formal feedback processes at university, they generally remain transition focused, and therefore they position students as passive, as recipient of information. But we know that for feedback processes to be useful, so students actually need to be active, and they need to seek to elicit feedback information also by themselves. I adhere in my project to the perspective that feedback is an active process rather than input, and positions students as active players who seek and receive feedback information from various sources, actively engages with it, and harnesses these comments to improve their learning. So it's not enough to change only feedback input. For example, to switch to audio or audio feedback comments, or for example, to provide timely and detailed feedback comments. So this doesn't automatically lead to students' engagement with feedback processes, with feedback input that they receive. We need to think about it in broader ways. And scholars call for considering the quality of the whole process. And this includes three main elements: context, students' individual characteristics, and prior experiences. And I focus specifically on one element because the importance of prior experiences for learning is one of the central aspects of many theories. For example, Bourdieu's theory of cultural capital, or Vygotsky's sociocultural theory. But past feedback experiences still are under-researched. And more specifically, in my project, I examined the stories of postgraduate coursework students or postgraduate taught students in order to examine what aspects of their past feedback experiences influence their future behaviors and feedback practices, and why I emphasize why my focus is on this particular group of students. When we talk about postgraduate coursework students, we make assumptions that because they have been to university before, they're learning experts. They know how to study. They understand how to navigate feedback processes. They know how to respond to feedback information and how to use it. However, postgraduate coursework students are a highly diverse group, and the fact that they have a prior degree does not make them learning experts. And we know that feedback processes in higher education are not perfect. So even if they have a degree, it doesn't mean that they have acquired skills and knowledge in order to be active in future feedback processes. And also what my research shows is that there is a broad set of other influences that adds to how students elicit feedback information and how they interact with this information. And this includes experiences not only from prior formal education, but also from other contexts, from other non-academic contexts. And so diversity of prior experiences makes students, even within the same cohort, different, and they perceive feedback differently, and they act upon feedback differently as well. And when talking about past feedback experiences, I use the concept of feedback histories. So this is an emerging concept, and I conceptualize this as students' prior experiences with feedback, including information from various sources in various contexts and using different processes. Primary data for my qualitative study was collected in 2 rounds, 1 trimester each. Participants completed an entry interview at the beginning, then a series of longitudinal audio diaries, and then a final interview at the end. Data collected from 12 participants was included into the study, and 4 participants were international students, 8 males, 4 females, and ages vary from 21 to 50 years old. And I have also 1 master by research student, and that's only because he expressed an interest to participate in my study. He wanted to take part in my study. That's why I said yes. To analyze data, we use reflexive thematic analysis by Braun and Clark. And the authors characterize their approach to thematic analysis as reflexive to emphasize the active role of the researcher in the knowledge production process. And they consider researchers' subjectivity as a resource rather than an obstacle. And the purpose of reflexive thematic analysis is to interpret data and to construct themes that are generated, and they don't just passively emerge from the data. And to my preliminary results, and to illustrate some results, I'll be using examples from 2 contrasting cases from my dataset. Both participants are female, and they are both doing their Master of Teaching course at different stages. And the first case is Daisy, an international student. The second case is Abigail. She's a domestic student. And they both reported feedback experiences from a range of contexts. And now I'll talk about preliminary results based on the data I've analyzed so far. The majority of students talked about engaging with feedback eliciting behaviors, but what they do is heavily influenced by what they think about feedback and about feedback elicitation. So first, I explored how feedback histories influence their attitude to and their perception of feedback elicitation. In the course of their master's degree, many students discuss greater openness to feedback seeking compared to the past. And 3 students talked about having critical events that led them to change their attitude to feedback seeking. And Daisy is one of them. She didn't ask much. So in the past, she didn't ask her teachers much. And she said, I think back in Taiwan, I'm more convinced that asking questions is dumb and silly sometimes. You have to ask very indirect way or just don't ask. Google it by yourself. Then in her master's course in Australia, she failed in her final semester and she was expelled from the university. I failed because I didn't ask a question or I didn't ask the right question. Unfortunately, no attention has been paid to her past feedback experiences and no support has been provided when she really needed it. To address this issue, she mobilized resources from, she mobilized other resources. For example, she had some sessions with a psychologist and now she's back to study and she has changed her attitude to feedback elicitation. She still struggles with asking questions, but she appreciates feedback information. She sees value in it and she seeks help. Other students were consistent in their feedback eliciting behaviors based on their past experiences being positive. For instance, Abigail, a lawyer, she experienced multiple instances of constructive feedback in response to her feedback seeking in the past, but she always found it useful. For example, her bachelor's degree, she had role plays and where she could get immediate feedback, and sometimes she did well, sometimes she received constructive comments, and that was fine. It was a part of the learning process, and she understood that. And work environment was and still is supportive, and feedback seeking is a common practice there. Where we are pretty collegiate workplace. Sometimes she, a colleague, can be a little bit straight to the point with no nicey-niceys. But she and I had experience and we knew exactly how that procedure wasn't quite right. And in her current course, she uses every opportunity to ask. She's vocal in class. She's not afraid of testing her ideas, and she's not afraid of getting constructive feedback. So what does it say about feedback histories is that they do influence attitude to feedback elicitation, but those attitudes are not stable. They evolve over time, they change, and these changes might be quite significant, as we saw in Daisy's example. And also there varies for different students. So some need more support than others, and knowing their past experiences, knowing their feedback histories can potentially improve learners' overall university experience. Attitude to feedback defines how students behave and how they engage with feedback information that they elicit from various sources. And my data suggests, my data provided examples of all major scenarios, from not engaging with feedback comments at all to adapting some of the feedback information and adopting everything what has been said to rejecting feedback input. And here are some examples from Daisy. When she got negative comments in her master's degree, she didn't know how to respond. She didn't know what to do, and she just gave up, and she didn't submit any further assignments at all, and she was expelled from the university. And now, when she has returned to her study, she has changed her attitude, and she tries to act upon feedback input. For example, after having booked some sessions with a study support services at university, she found that if in an assignment she's asked for ABC, she doesn't need to answer XYZ, and that's what she does now when she writes her assignments. However, other circumstances of her life, plus work, plus barriers created by the university context itself, such as blended course, and she doesn't have many opportunities. She doesn't have many face-to-face classes, and also feedback comments for summative assessments come quite late, and she doesn't have an opportunity to act upon them. And also not many opportunities in the course in general that are designed specifically to foster feedback elicitation. all these prevent her from from engaging with feedback information more actively. And so the last quote on the screen is her explanation of why she did not ask for clarification when she didn't understand teachers, when she once didn't understand teachers' feedback comments. Examples from Abigail provide different types of engagement, and the first quote is from her workplace when she adopted feedback comments after some resistance. And so this quote is from her creative writing unit, and it showcases that she engages with the information, she makes sense of it, and she applies whatever she finds useful. And also sometimes students don't know how to act even they would like to. Like in the last quote that you can see on the screen, Abigail appreciated feedback comments that she received and they made her feel good, but they were not actionable. It was lovely and made me feel awesome to get this feedback, but I felt like it wasn't specific. It wasn't targeted, clear exactly what to do. So our data shows that postgraduate students are more active in feedback elicitation now compared to their prior degrees. However, feedback input at university doesn't always promote active behaviors. And despite students' positive or negative past experiences, context and feedback design might either encourage or prevent active participation and feedback seeking. And another theme that came up in the data is that past feedback experiences shape informal or incidental feedback elicitation or learning conversations. In university context, two common sources of information are teachers and peers, and all participants reported having a learning conversation with peers, and the majority were talking about informal feedback from teachers. And here's an example of informal peer feedback from Daisy's prior degree where she had a lot of group assignments and they showed each other their drafts to share ideas. And here's an example from her workplace. And then I tried to do a plan. It was a lot of discussion with my mentor and other teachers and nearly everyone, because we shared the same playground. And this context and this type of comments from work, from the placements, they found the most useful because they were authentic, they were applicable to her, both to her work and to her study. And the quote from her current course about learning conversations with teachers. However, in our data set, we found also examples where other stakeholders were involved in students' feedback elicitation and in learning conversations. For example, Abigail actively seeks comments from people outside her university. In the past, it was mostly her parents, and then her network grew. And the second quote shows that it's a summary of her feedback network beyond university that includes her sisters, her friends, her husband, and also children play a big role in that. And here are some ideas about learning conversations we think are coming through the data. First, people with work experiences are more open to new sources of feedback elicitation, including friends outside university, family members, and work colleagues. And second, established feedback networks that can be trusted are really important sources of feedback information for postgraduate coursework students. And to some preliminary conclusions now. So what we found is that people didn't have many effective feedback encounters in their prior formal education. So going back to the idea of learning experts, our data proves it wrong. And also in feedback elicitation, other contexts and other sources of feedback information are important. Diversity of feedback histories require a different level of support for different students in feedback practices. And finally, discontinuity between contexts is a major issue that prevents transferring feedback knowledge and feedback skills from one setting to another. And here are some the references that are used in my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anastasia. That was a really interesting paper. We've got one question in the chat. Hopefully some others will come up. Karen Lander has asked, do you think you would find similar findings with undergraduate students, or would this be different as they are less experienced learners?
Some findings might be similar. For example, lack of opportunities for formal feedback seeking, for example, in the courses, because feedback design is, I can't say that feedback design is the top priority for learning developers or for teachers who develop courses. So that might be similar. However, what I can see that feedback elicitation from other sources, so beyond university, that is definitely different. And I didn't present it in that presentation, but there are I've got also examples where students were seeking feedback on their university work, but from their colleagues at work, because they trusted them. So that is connected with trust and credibility judgment when they know that someone is, let's call them knowledgeable others. So they trust those people, so they ask their help, even if it's not their peer or their teacher.
Thank you. We've got a comment in the chat from Kate Ippolito. I don't know if you want to speak yourself, Kate. I'm happy to give the question out. You've said, thank you for a very interesting presentation, thinking about the breadth of personal and professional contexts that feed into an individual's feedback histories. Were there any patterns in data regarding why students don't engage in feedback, adopt all feedback, adopt some, or reject feedback?
Yeah, thanks, Anastasia. I just wondered if anything. I know there were 12 interviews. Were there patterns, because you collected data over quite a longitudinal period, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get a sense of
12
any?
weeks.
Yeah, it's great.
Can you repeat the question, please?
So I just wondered whether there's any patterns in the data regarding why students either don't engage with feedback, they adopt it all, they adopt some, or they reject feedback. So you kind of had 4 conditions that they tended to fall into, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Was it different for every participant, or?
I cannot say like for sure, because I haven't finished my data analysis yet. But what can I say from what I have done so far is that lack of reflective tasks and is one of the major issues, because even within my study, these 12 weeks, a relatively short longitudinal study, but when they were reflecting, when they were talking about their feedback experiences, they started thinking about, okay, I haven't done this in the past, but I'm thinking about it now. So I could have done it differently. I could, even Daisy, she said that I could have asked questions. Maybe it could have been a different outcome. And she was expelled from the university, yes, but this catastrophic outcome could be avoided if she asked questions. So she reflects on it. So yeah, definitely lack of reflective tasks. And the second thing that I noticed so far is that not enough opportunities, as I have said already, are designed into the course. So it's basically end of the unit, summative assessments, when students get their feedback and the unit is over, so they didn't have a chance to adopt anything. Yeah, another thing, so feedback literacy skills. So students sometimes do not appreciate, they do not seek feedback, they do not see feedback's value. So they just don't know, because they have never experienced that in the past. So yeah, a lot of work to do from both sides, because it's not only about students, they don't know something what to do. It's also about teachers. Teachers sometimes don't know what to do either.
Yeah, thank you.
That leads on to a question about the teachers themselves. What do you think the implications for educators are from your findings?
Yeah, a good question. So I would say that probably one obvious implication would be to start thinking about feedback as process. So it's not something, it's not just one piece of information that can magically change students' attitude to feedback or improve magically their learning or their learning outcomes or their learning strategies somehow. So it's a continuous process. And as we could see it even from these two examples that I provided today, experiences, feedback experiences that students have, they gather these experiences, they reflect on them, and this, among other influences, this influence how they perceive feedback and how they act upon this. So yeah, as teachers, what can be done is probably to start thinking about feedback as process and to create opportunities in courses for dialogue to make feedback processes more interactive, and of course to know your students.
Thank you. We've got two more questions. The first one is from Lauren Shields, who wanted to learn a bit more about your research methods. How much freedom and direction did you give the students when they were completing their audio diaries? And what, if any, prompts did you give them?
Yeah. They received a list of prompts, for sure. However, I did not restrict them to answer every single question. What I did is that I asked them to send their recordings when they recorded them straight afterwards. And in the final interview, I created an individual list of questions for every single participant. And these questions were based on their longitudinal audio diaries, on whatever information they provided. And if something was missing, or some information, I wanted some more information on their responses, that's what I asked them in the exit interviews.
Okay, thank you. Lauren, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask following up from that?
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I suppose I was just wondering, kind of, when you were asking them to reflect on their feedback experiences kind of as they were going along, did they have choice as to what they would be talking about, or did you kind of specifically ask for their reflections in particular areas of their courses? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that perfectly makes sense. It was a bit of a challenge because again, students' ideas about feedback is as feedback as input. So their first thought was, of course, okay, feedback from teachers. So something that I get after I have submitted my assignment and we received it back. However, I was trying to avoid the word feedback per se. So I was trying to use some comments or some information on some advice, some help that you received from someone on your work. That was one strategy that I used. And the second one, I had some examples from where they could get feedback information and could reflect on some experiences, workplace. And we also discussed it in our entry interviews. So when we just met for the first time, and I was asking questions, and I was asking them questions about different contexts. So they had like a vague idea about what I'm looking for.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, and the final question, we've got a couple of minutes left, from Sarah Jackson. She is asking about the peer learning conversations. In undergraduate, the issues I am finding can be a barrier to engagement in that process. Do you have any suggestions as to how to develop trust with peers from your conversations with students?
Yeah, probably one like striking, not one, but there were a few examples, but they were striking, is that students really value when peer feedback is incorporated into the course, because especially it's important for postgraduate coursework students, because they usually study, and some of them study full time. So this time barriers is really an issue for them. So, and if peer feedback is incorporated into the course, if it's assessed, so it's compulsory to do, so then they do it. So they don't need to spend extra time to ask their peers. And another thing is that it's important to do it in current situation of when even on-campus learning is still not on campus as it used to be. It's still blended learning, and most of the time students sometimes they don't know each other. They know who to approach if they want to ask someone's advice, or if they want to get someone's feedback, comments. So yeah, if it's incorporated into the unit, so that's really helpful. That's what some of the participants were talking about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anastasia.
Thank
We're
you.
going to pass over to, and thank you for that great presentation. It's very interesting. We're going to really try to keep time today. So I'm going to ask Karen Lander if she will now begin her presentation.
Can everybody see my presentation?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so thank you for having the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm going to be telling you about an ongoing project, really, so some preliminary and early results. And maybe I'll start by kind of telling you a little bit about kind of why I'm interested in this project and topic. So I'm an experimental cognitive psychologist. Most of my research is to do with kind of social communication from the face. But obviously at my university, at the University of Manchester in the UK, over the years, I've taken on lots of kind of roles, most recently being program director for a number of postgraduate courses. And so part of my role, both postgraduates and undergraduates, is to support students with resits and interruption. And it's kind of thinking about these students and what we can do to help support them in these sometimes difficult circumstances. And so this research is kind of part of this bigger project. It's funded by the Institute of Teaching and Learning, and it's a 2-year project. I'm relatively near the beginning of the project, although we've started to collect some data. We've perhaps been a bit slower than I might have anticipated because we've had quite a lot of challenges with the University of Manchester, very stringent ethics guidelines. So I've managed to get over those now, and we're at the data collection phase, which is brilliant. Incidentally, this work is all to do with a number of student partners. So we're working with a student partner who's outside of psychology, Caitlin Hunter. And I've also got a number of student helpers from psychology. At the moment, I've got 5 student helpers who are helping me to run the focus groups that I'm talking about. Okay, so, hang on. See if she's going to let, oh, there you go. Okay, so let me start by telling you a little bit about what I mean by resits and interruption. I'm sure you're fully familiar with it, but a resit can be an exam, or it can be a coursework element, and is an opportunity to sit an assessment again. Usually these are offered to students who have failed an assessment. At the University of Manchester, that's failing to meet a mark of 40%. In some circumstances, if they're mitigating circumstances, a student might be entitled to sit their exam again rather than resit their exam. So I am talking about resits here, where students have failed to achieve the academic standard. Also, to complicate things slightly further at the University of Manchester, students who don't meet the required 40%, some students will be offered a resit, and other students will be compensated for that mark if their other marks are high enough. So it tends to be the students who've kind of got below kind of 30 or below in terms of a percentage who might be given the opportunity to resit an assessment again. Interruption then is usually when students are taking a break from their studies. The break kind of often involves the rest of the academic year, and then they restart again at the same point in the following year. And they're usually and only allowed at the University of Manchester for kind of health-related, perhaps financial, but other significant personal or work-related reasons. So it couldn't be the case that students are simply allowed to interrupt with no reason. Okay. Of course, then, resits provide a second chance for students. Okay, they give them the chance to regain the credits or the units for that particular unit. Usually students, even if they're resitting a course or a unit or an exam, will be awarded the mark that they get at the second time round, regardless of whether it's higher or lower. Often that mark is capped at a maximum of 40%, or it may be capped at a maximum of 40%, so that students can achieve the credits that they require for that particular unit. Students then who are achieving kind of a mark of perhaps 30 or certainly 40 and below may lack academic confidence. So they're kind of really underconfident for why they've not done very well, and they may find it difficult to admit their failure, and they may not seek advice on how to turn this failure into success. And you do find with students that some students may realise that they just simply haven't done enough work, and that's why they've not passed their exam. More of an issue is students who've done a fair amount of work, are feeling relatively confident first time round, and then they don't meet the academic standard. And then they're really in quite a difficult position then as to know, what do I do next in order to do better the next time I take this exam or this unit? Similarly, students who interrupt their courses typically have things that they might need to catch up on when they come back. They might have obstacles to overcome. They're in a different academic year group, and they need to, before they can continue their academic study. So they also kind of provide a second chance, and they also may lack academic confidence because they've been away from their university environment. They've kind of got to get back into things. Okay, if we think about the scale of the issue, first of all, in the BSc Psychology Honours students, there were 23 interrupters last year, so that's about 4%, and 50 odd students resitting a unit, which is about 10% of psychology in Manchester in 2021 to 22. Similarly, for kind of the postgraduate courses, there were 2 interrupters, so about 7%, and 2 students resitting a unit. So that's kind of about 7% in 21-22. But of course, the level of resits and interruption will vary by university and by course. Okay, so it may well be that there's more resits in the first year because that doesn't count towards their final degree mark at Manchester. It may be that there's slightly less in postgraduate courses because they are these experienced learners. And it may matter depending on which course you're doing. So for medics, for example, they can't resit a single unit. They have to resit an entire year if they fail a unit. I suppose my point here is that the university certainly plays a critical role in providing external support for these students. So there's something that the university can do to try and help these students. And there are kind of a barrier to continuing at the university. So this is a point where a fair number of students might drop out or feel really or they fail to achieve the academic standard and so cannot continue with their courses. So trying to think about things that the university can do kind of externally for these students to support them. Okay, also internally, students can help themselves as well. So self-efficacy is the belief in one's own capability, so that you're going to perform an action or achieve a specific outcome. So it's kind of their positivity, their confidence in how well they're going to do. And obviously, if you've not passed something, then your self-efficacy might be low. So social cognition theory draws attention to the importance of self-belief and self-efficacy. And there's certainly evidence that self-efficacious students work harder, work more readily, persist longer, etc. And self-efficacy is a skill that's related to a student's positive emotional state and self-confidence. And so not only can we, as a university, provide external support for students, but the idea is that we can try and get students to improve their self-efficacy, to improve kind of their own internal belief in doing well with these courses and resits and interruption. Okay, so in terms of my overall project, is to try to explore the types of external support and things that students want during resit periods and during periods of interruption, and when they come back from interruption. My next aim is to try to outline recommendations for good practice in terms of university-based support. And what I've been seeing from chatting to people is that there is no kind of accepted university standard for support in these circumstances at the University of Manchester, certainly. But there are some pockets of absolutely excellent practice that are going on already. And we also need to consider ways to help students to improve their self-efficacy. And we're going to focus on the first two in the talk today. So as I said, I'm working with a team of student partners. So Caitlin Hunter is an author on this paper, but also there's 5 new placement students who are helping me and partners. Okay, so we conducted some focus groups with staff and students, gathering data about the kinds of support that are available or that they would like, okay, across 3 University of Manchester faculties. So we're trying to span across different places in the university. We started off in psychology and then got a bit broader. We're trying to include all levels of students, so undergraduates and postgraduate students. And I'm going to be talking about some preliminary focus group data today. We're also currently conducting interviews with students. So these are people who have interrupted and come back after interruption, or have undertaken a number of units and needed to resit them. At the focus groups, we've got kind of drawn from all students and staff, so you didn't necessarily need to have interrupted or resat. You could kind of talk in a hypothetical way about the kind of supports, if you were in that circumstance, you may like to, this kind of support you may like to have. We're also rolling out a large questionnaire data. That's kind of more in my comfort zone, I suppose, being an experimental psychologist. So we're gathering much more data about kind of the levels of resits and interruption. And then the kind of sources of support that we identify in the focus groups are leading through into the questionnaire data. So we're asking students to kind of order those different sources of support and looking at the synergy between the two kind of responses. But we're also, kind of collecting questionnaire data on self-efficacy as well. Okay. So it's an ongoing project. As I said, we've got data from 6 focus groups so far. We've had about 10 participants per group, and one of the groups was staff only. And the focus groups with students were run by the student partners, and each member of the group was identified by a number only, and the staff group was run by me. We did achieve a Manchester ethics approval, finally, and we asked focus group members to identify any problems or issues they could foresee during resits or interruption, and to try and identify strategies that they think could help. Okay, so we took relatively detailed notes with a couple of student partners took notes during the focus groups. And what we did was we tried to do a kind of a thematic analysis based on those notes. And as I said, we had students who hadn't necessarily undertaken resits or periods of interruption, but they could think hypothetically. And if we did have a circumstance where students started to talk about their individual circumstances, maybe the difficult circumstances about why they needed to interrupt, we tried to kind of recenter the talk back around to kind of a wider, broader level rather than their individual circumstances, simply because we didn't want them to try to give out information that they weren't happy for everybody to know and to share. Okay, so we did a kind of thematic analysis, Braun and Clark, as we've already heard in the previous talk, where we tried to identify kind of common themes that come through in the notes from these focus groups. Okay, so 3 themes we kind of identified, and perhaps these are slightly driven by a kind of a top-down sort of idea, as well as kind of what was coming through in the data. And it depended somewhat on how good the notes were from the note takers. So some would kind of write down verbatim what was actually said, and some would write kind of slightly more generic notes. So that's something we need to think about going forward with our focus groups. But certainly there was kind of the first theme that we came across was about contact. So many focus group members said that they had reduced contact during resits or interruption, or that they would like more contact from the university in these periods when it was difficult. So these kind of quotes that came out were, it'd be really useful if I had someone to speak to about what went wrong last time. I feel out of touch and isolated. I don't know anyone in my year anymore, and this makes it difficult. So you can see here that kind of that's a student who was interrupted and come back. I lost contact with a friend when they interrupted, and I wondered what happened to them. Okay, so we tried to map. Oh, sorry, hang on. Yeah, just go back. The bottom of my screen is just cut off by my my screen sharing. But okay, so what we tried to do was, once we'd identified a theme, we tried to map it onto a strategy. So you know, kind of think of strategies to increase contact. So giving them somebody to chat to in the form of a peer mentor, kind of getting somebody that's identified at the university that they can contact during resits might be something where you could increase contact with the university. Okay, second sort of theme was in terms of content. So students, if they hadn't passed an exam or a unit first time round, it's particularly, they talked about content here. So I don't know where I went wrong last time, so this doesn't help me learn. If you don't understand it to begin with, and I can't see how you can improve. So, you know, again, students who, you know, really struggled the first time with a unit or with an exam, if they didn't really know where they went wrong, that made it really difficult for them to think about how to improve next time round. So the kind of useful strategies we're thinking of that might map onto are things like providing examples of exam questions with hints, you know, talking through their exam with somebody and where they went wrong, you know, talking through with somebody else about where they went wrong. So trying to improve and boost that content so they know where to go to in order to facilitate their learning and hopefully do better next time round. Certainly in psychology, a lot of students, a lot of the resits were about statistics. So students, some students really love statistics and do really well at it. We do have a cohort of students who really struggle with the statistics. And so, you know, when they've not passed the statistics first time round and they don't understand it, you know, where is it they can get some support with in order to try and learn those things to improve and have a good chance at passing it second time round. Okay, third theme then was confidence. So focus group members identified that when undergoing resits or returning from interruptions, they may have, you know, low confidence. So they just didn't know where to start. They didn't know how to improve. They were kind of always thinking that they were going to do badly. They didn't know how to revise or what I need to do in these circumstances. So again, we try to do some kind of mapping from these themes, this confidence theme, onto useful strategies. So here, you know, a generic study skills class that helps you to try and identify how best to revise might be suitable in some circumstances. Information about confidence boosting strategies so you don't give up before you've even started. And we know that certainly students who are low on self-efficacy kind of are more prone to this kind of academic procrastination where they put off learning about something. And if you put off learning, then you're reducing the amount of time that you've got to learn that content. And that's kind of negatively impacting your ability and your success at passing that exam second time round. Goal setting is another thing that's been talked about in terms of confidence. So these strategies are the ones that are going to be feeding into the questionnaire that we're going to be launching soon. Okay, so in our focus groups then, we've identified 3 key themes, contact, content, and confidence. And then certainly increased contact may help increase student engagement during resits and following periods of interruption. And certainly we've started to introduce kind of return to university type interviews for students who are coming back to university following interruption to see, how is it that we can support them to get back into the academic environment. Help with unit content would help increase student engagement, particularly when students are required to retake resits. So helping them when they're really struggling and they don't understand the content. So helping them to improve that content. And strategies to improve confidence, self-confidence would help improve student engagement and health self-efficacy. So helping students to help themselves. Our future work then is to run further focus groups. We've got a whole load of new work to try to kind of run some more focus groups across different locations, and perhaps try to pull out some of those more nuanced effects with kind of undergraduates versus postgraduates. And certainly resits may matter less to first years because as long as they eventually pass the courses, that doesn't feed into their final degree mark. We are already trying to identify some examples of good practice. So, certainly we have some places in the university that are doing this really well. We want to collect our larger scale quantitative data from the questionnaires and consider which strategies are most useful and why. And then kind of feed into guidelines and recommendations for the University of Manchester in terms of what should be the standard for the university-based support for students who are resitting or returning from interruption. And also along the way, try to improve self-efficacy as we go. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Karen. A lot to think about there. There's a few questions. I had a question about if you saw any connection between the particular reasons for the resits and the success of the student upon return. Is that something you've been able to kind of determine?
So in terms of, the reason that they're resitting and whether they're successful. Yeah, I guess we haven't really looked at that because at the moment, the focus groups are kind of quite hypothetical in terms of, we haven't got into a kind of, this is the reason why you've not passed this course. This is the strategy that's most helpful, and this is how you succeeded. And that was partly driven by the ethics criteria, i.e. they would not allow me or us to ask students information that they may not wish to share with everybody. And they were also not willing for me to run the focus groups as an academic member of staff. So they're being run by the student members. But we are planning to run some interviews and are currently doing that. And that's much more kind of in-depth, nuanced information. And those are interviews with students who have undertaken resits or come back from a period of interruption. So that might be the point where we could start to pull out some of those things. And similarly, in the larger scale questionnaire data, we should have information from kind of our, it's kind of expected to be about 600 respondees in terms of, what resits have they had to do, and why have they had to do them, and what are the strategies that they think they may have employed, and what are the strategies that they think they should have employed. So we haven't got that data yet, but hopefully we will get something that will answer that sort of point.
Okay, great, thank you. I mean, following on from that, we've got another question about methodology from Sarah Jackson, who has said, it's great that you've got student partners involved in the learning focus groups. Being new to social science research, I'm interested to know, why did you choose note-taking as a data collection method? Okay,
so yeah, primarily what we were hoping to do was to not take notes, but to instead record all our sessions and to transcribe them. And we thought that, that although that's quite a lengthy thing to do, it's obviously you've got, you can see what somebody's saying. But we were actually prevented from doing that with the ethics because that would make the individuals identifiable. And so our next best was to go for note-taking. So note-taking in that circumstance, where we're identifying people only by number, and we're making notes. And that is quite a tricky process in itself, as I alluded to, that we need to kind of work on our note-taking as such, in the sense that, some of the student partners are kind of writing very, very detailed notes, and that's kind of super helpful. Whereas others are writing much more generic kind of overview type notes, which is less helpful in these circumstances if you're wanting to do thematic analysis. So I think, in the next kind of tranche of focus groups, we're going to need to kind of work a little bit on that and kind of come up with a bit more of a strategy about what's kind of a suitable level of note-taking. And perhaps, because I've got quite a few student helpers now, I think we might end up sending a couple to each of the focus groups as well, because that will again give us that kind of a bit more span about note-taking. So although we're not in an ideal circumstance, my idea would be to record and to transcribe. This was our kind of best next case scenario.
Sarah, did you answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
I know that was great, thank you. It's just you've explained it really well there. Thanks, Karen. It's an ethics issue essentially. I was just a little bit perplexed as to what the justification was for choosing it, but that answers that really well. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. As an experimental psychologist with ethics, I'm certainly used to going to ethics, and I've had more problems trying to conduct this research than trying to do any of my other generic sort of face communication type research. So, it was an interesting process in itself. So, yeah, a learning experience.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Excellent. We have a question from David Bowden. Forgive me if I'm saying your name wrong. He notes that resits aren't inevitable. They're less common in some countries than in the UK. Where is the most useful place for interventions to occur to promote self-efficacy? Wouldn't external support be more effectively applied before students failed in the first place? And of course, design to enable students to realize how they are tracking prior to final exams being tried.
Yeah, I completely agree. Our ideal scenario would be that less students failed in the first place, and that would be great. And it depends on the unit design, and we've got lots of variability across different courses and across different units. Some will allow kind of mini assessments as we go. I'm thinking of the Teacher's Eye course where student can kind of track to see whether they're on course to be passing that unit. Others will simply have a kind of an assessment at the end of the unit and nothing before then. And so, whilst you may be not feeling particularly confident, you may be hoping that you're going to pass that unit, and it's unclear that you're not going to pass it. Some of these are self-efficacy strategies, we can try to kind of build into students, at the beginning of their courses. It's much more difficult to kind of build them in when they're already kind of low in confidence. It's much easier to kind of get those strategies in place at the beginning before they start to fail the unit. So yeah, I absolutely agree. But I guess whilst resits are inevitable, we need to think about what strategies we're going to apply if they're in that circumstance. Yeah.
David, was there anything you wanted to follow up on that with?
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we have time for one more from Kate Ippolito. I understand that some of your participants are in the position of having retaken and passed and having returned from iOS. Do they have positive stories to tell too? Recovering from a setback like failing an exam can be really useful for building stronger self-efficacy. Have you looked at positive outcomes, and it could be useful for building self-efficacy for current students on iOS and resitting via vicarious success?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking that much more of these kind of positive outcomes are going to come through in the interviews, because by nature of the people that we're going to interview, if they've had a period of interruption or resits, and I'm interviewing, that means that they're still at the university. So, you know, they must have kind of overcome to a certain extent some of those difficulties, and to allow them to remain at the university. So yes, I'm thinking that some of those stories are going to come through more in the interviews than they do in the focus groups. And if people in the focus groups kind of veered into their personal circumstances, the aim was to kind of veer them back onto a more kind of generic way of kind of level of speaking. So those kind of individual stories didn't really come through in the focus groups, but I'm hoping that they will come through in terms of the interviews, and we can use some of those to kind of build in self-efficacy and kind of resilience at the beginning for students. So yeah, that is the idea as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really
Karen. That's great. I look forward to hearing about the strategies and what's working, and progress with this. We'll be very interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thanks to our first two speakers. We're going to now move on to our third speaker, Grace Thompson.
Thank you, Claire. Hello, everybody. I'm from Australia. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm working and living on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people and pay respects to elders past and present. It is 10 p.m. here in Melbourne, Australia, so we shall see how we go at this time of night. But thank you so much for coming along to this presentation. This project focuses on student perceptions of experiential learning tasks that take place in classroom settings. I'm talking about things like role plays, demonstrations of techniques and methods that are designed for students to practice skills in the classroom and receive feedback from peers, tutors, and teachers right on the spot. This project therefore doesn't include practicum or placement experiences. So vocational master's degrees, things like Master of Social Work, Music Therapy, which is my home base, Speech Pathology and Audiology, have a long tradition of case-based learning and providing constructive feedback to support students to develop the skills and techniques that they need on the job. In the classroom, experiential learning activities often involve small group work, with students taking different roles and giving each other feedback. I teach a number of these subjects, and over the years, the student evaluation surveys have all had a similar thread of really highly variable experiences from students. There are often positive statements like this one. All the practical learning we did was really helpful, and it will help me in my placements and my future work, which is great. But then there are comments about the challenges, but also the benefits, like this one. Some of the experiential learning tasks felt out of my comfort zone. However, I believe that this benefited my learning. And then there are concerning statements like this one. Sometimes it's just too stressful to perform in front of the whole class. So I wondered why there was so much variability in student experiences. And as a teacher, I thought it probably had more to do with student factors, such as their personality. Maybe they were more introverted or reserved. Their learning style, maybe they preferred to watch and read rather than do things actively in the classroom. Or maybe it was related to diversity issues, things like mental health challenges or disability. The literature acknowledges that when the discomfort of learning something new becomes too great, students are less likely to persist in their learning. Certainly, the importance of scaffolding student learning has been acknowledged for some time. But from the student feedback, it seems that we still might need to do more to support their participation. Interestingly, research with graduates has reported that they often look back on experiential learning in their course and consider it to have been highly beneficial. The way I read it is, it was worth the discomfort that they might have experienced. So I wanted to explore our current students' perceptions of the value they placed on experiential learning in the classroom and whether their views correlated with their personal characteristics such as health, personality, preferred learning style, and learning emotions. And so I designed a mixed methods survey. These are my research questions on the screen here. It's a mixed methods survey design, and it was selected because it was perceived as being low burden for students and they would remain completely anonymous. So I commenced by focusing on students from my own discipline first, and then expanded the study to include students from 3 other master's courses that I considered had similar approaches to classroom-based experiential learning tasks. And these included speech pathology, social work, and audiology. I'm going to show you my survey design now. The survey questions included explanatory variables. We looked at student demographics. We asked them questions about their personality. We asked them about their preferred learning style and their learning emotions. And by this, I mean their anxiety and worry and the impact of this anxiety, their self-efficacy, and their task importance. And later we added a more sensitive measure of anxiety called the Brief Fear of Negative Evaluation Scale, which I'll talk a bit more in a moment. Our dependent variable was the students' perceived value of role play for their learning. And in addition, I included 4 free text questions as well. We had 122 students take this survey, which was a response rate of 28.7%. And for the free text questions, this was a very engaged group. I received really in-depth responses from nearly every student, a few sentences, small paragraphs. And in fact, I abandoned the need for follow-up interviews because we had so much data from so many students, which was absolutely great. All right, well, let's have a look at the participants' personal characteristics. We had many more people, 75%, who said that they use she, her pronouns in the sample, which is not surprising as these were health professional master's courses. Nearly 15% were international students. 12.3% had an official academic adjustment plan, which at the University of Melbourne is a direct record of an official health disadvantage or other form of disadvantage. But in addition to that, people who are on the record with a certain level of disadvantage, nearly 51% of the students here self-identified as having a health issue of some kind. I found that quite extraordinary. As a teacher of 10 years, I still found that statistic quite incredible. However, the statistical modelling showed no differences in how students valued experiential learning for any of these demographic factors. Mental health, disability, international student, gender, nothing came up as impacting the value they placed on these tasks. All right, well, let's have a look at the dependent variable, which was the students' perceived value of experiential learning. And this was measured by 9 questions that the students rated with a 5-point Likert scale from 1, strongly disagree, to 5, strongly agree. So if you rated all of the items as agree or higher, meaning that you highly value experiential learning, you would expect a score of 36 and above. But for this sample, the mean score is 32.8. So that means that the average for each question would be 3.65. So from 3, neither agreed or disagree, and between 3 and a 4, and 4 being agree. So they're a little ambivalent in this sample, which is good for our stats. So let's have a look at the other explanatory variables now. There is a slight tendency for more extroverted students to value experiential learning more. However, this result didn't reach statistical significance. And for the other personality types, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness, there was no statistical difference in their rating of the value of experiential learning. But students' preferred learning style does seem to be a factor. Those who rated themselves as higher on preferring to be actively doing things in their learning are more likely to value experiential learning than students who rated themselves as preferring to watch and listen. Whether students rated themselves as preferring to think through ideas and concepts or tuning into their feelings and senses didn't make a significant difference in their value of experiential learning. Now, in terms of the learning emotions, the first anxiety question in the survey asked students, overall, how nervous or anxious did you feel when attending your methods classes? Out of 122 students, only 5 responded that they had 0 nervousness or anxiety before class. That's only 4% of students. And of those students who experienced some anxiety, those with lower levels of anxiety valued experiential learning more. And those who considered that their anxiety had a positive impact on their learning, like it kind of gave them a little bit of a buzz, I guess, from being in the class, also tended to value experiential learning more. Similarly, those who felt more confident in their ability to participate and those who actually believed that doing this task was going to be good for their learning also valued these experiences more. Okay, so clearly there's something here in this explanatory variable. So when we expanded the data set in 2023, we added this more sensitive and specific anxiety measure, the brief fear of negative evaluation scale, which measures the degree to which people experience apprehension at the possibility of being evaluated negatively by others. I would probably be scoring quite high on this scale right now. In the modelling for this subgroup, it was clear that the more apprehensive students are about the evaluation of others, the less they value these experiential learning tasks, which links to our other presenters today around the concern that students have about their peer group and the way the peers might see them in the classroom. So we brought together the statistical modelling and proposed the students who value experiential learning the most are those who are more likely to be the following. They prefer to be actively doing tasks than watching and listening. They feel less nervous or anxious about the classroom activities. They feel more confident in their ability to participate. And they believe that participating in the task is important for their learning. Right, let's go on to the qualitative analysis. As mentioned earlier, there was an enthusiastic response to the pre-text questions, with many students writing a few sentences or a short paragraph for each of these questions. As each question had quite a discrete topic, I undertook a thematic analysis for each of these questions before integrating the qualitative themes with the quantitative results. And I'm going to show you just the themes and sub-themes from each topic so that you get a sense of the data, and then I'm going to present the mixed methods analysis. Okay, so here's topic 1 around students managing the challenges they perceive with their participation. The themes and sub-themes here indicate that students are doing a lot to self-manage the challenge with these activities. They're doing things before class, things like coming prepared, making sure they've practiced and are familiar with the material. During the class, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. They're doing a lot of what I labeled as self-regulating behaviours. They're kind of talking to themselves, focus on the long-term benefits, or the short-term benefits. This will help you pass the assignment. They want to work with people they know, their close peers, and together in their small groups, they actually take action to modify the task if it's too stressful for them. And after class, they're debriefing and reflecting both together or more personally. In the question related to the supportive factors, 3 kind of major theme areas came through. These were more relational dimensions, things like the importance of constructive and honest feedback from both their teachers and peers, and the importance of creating a supportive and non-judgmental classroom atmosphere. There were pedagogical dimensions as well. They wanted more opportunity for repetition and practice and examples from their teachers and peers. And they wanted to really know that what they were doing in the classroom linked to professional skills and have clear expectations for what they needed to do. And I grouped a couple of things around things like safety, that there was an optimal group size for some of these activities. Too big and it was too intimidating, too small and it was a bit too exposing. And they wanted realistic expectations for their learning. In terms of the discomfort and the challenges, there were 2 major areas here. Students talked about their intrapersonal discomfort and their interpersonal discomfort. That a lot of these activities were quite demanding and they found it difficult to focus in class, and that made them feel uncomfortable. In these courses that were around helping professions, some of them were worried that it didn't feel right to be the role play in the client position, that felt uncomfortable to them. And the interpersonal discomfort links to some of those quantitative results, that there was some relational tension in working with their peers and feeling pressure to perform. I love the 4th question because we asked them, what advice would you give to other students who were coming into this class and engaging in experiential learning? And here the themes fell into attitudes and actions. I found it really fascinating that in the attitudes, they were also encouraging their peers to have a go, to take it easy and be kind to yourself, think about the learning benefits, to know your boundaries, stay positive and open. It was kind of like they were giving their peers their own little pep talk, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. And in the actions, they were very, very clear here that they were telling each other to be supportive with each other and communicate with their peers, ask for support, ask questions, and to practice and come prepared. Okay, so let's have a look at the way the mixed methods design came through. This was a convergent design, sometimes referred to as a concurrent or parallel design. And the overall intent here of the researcher is to converge or combine the results from the two data sets to obtain a more complete understanding of the problem. And so here is the mixed methods convergent results. The central finding, I languaged in this way. So the central finding is that quality experiential learning from the student perspective requires educators to balance challenge with care. And there were four kind of aspects or features or resources, I called them, related to this. In the group work, we need to consider the group as a whole and foster a supportive and non-judgmental atmosphere. There are individual student resources, and we need to be aware of these, recognizing that not every student prefers to learn through doing, even though we might believe it's the best way to learn, or feels confident in their learning. The pedagogical resources and the learning design, they kind of go together, but I separated them out a bit here, that we need to carefully think about our pedagogy, being clear and constructive and respecting student boundaries. And then in the learning design, to really make sure that we're on top of these factors, even the basic things like making sure there's enough time for practice and for feedback, that it doesn't feel rushed, that students have that opportunity to engage with each other. And to really make sure that we are scaffolding well and gradually building up the skills and the knowledge that we want students to obtain. All right. So how do we balance learning challenge with care in experiential activities? And I wonder here whether in these types of courses and subjects, whether we're really tending to think about one type of student, the confident, keen to engage, ready to go kind of student. So rather than just teaching to this one type of confident student who learns best from doing, can we as educators do more to normalise that experiential learning can feel uncomfortable to some people? Can we help prepare students to manage any feelings of nervousness or anxiety that they might have? Can we more clearly explain the benefits for learning and skill development? And through our learning design, reduce those aspects of the task that might actually exacerbate peer judgment. I think we also need to ensure that the in situ feedback and teacher feedback is supportive and constructive. And what I'll take with me certainly is to include more variety or choice around doing versus watching. So that's actually the end of my presentation. I think I might have read that a little bit faster than what I practiced. So I hope that it wasn't too fast for you to take it all in. But there we go, Claire. I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. The particularly the mixed method of quantitative and qualitative analysis. I found that really interesting. You had said that you were surprised, and you've been doing this for a while, you were surprised by the self-identification of such a large proportion of the students with mental health and physical health issues. Can you think of any reasons for this? Do you think that the pandemic has had an effect here upon students? I don't know if this is a question that can be answered from your data, but I was just wondering if you had any ideas about that, the reasons behind it.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts about that. One of the other things that we asked them was about whether they were learning on campus or online. I didn't include that in the presentation because it was another factor that had no bearing in the statistical modelling. It was equal. This project, I guess, started in my mind before the pandemic. I was noticing that students were choosing to just opt out of these activities, just saying, oh, I don't really feel like it today. Then during the pandemic, we obviously went through a shift to online learning, and we had sort of similar things. Like sometimes students would engage in the Zoom and online types of learning activities. Some would opt out, say, I'm not up to it today. And then coming back from the pandemic, this continued. So I don't know from the data whether it's increasing, because I don't have the comparison. My feeling is that it is having some impact just on the comfort with social interaction and losing some practice with classroom dynamics and feedback and intensity. But my feeling is that it was growing before that there might be something more about the current society or this generation of learners that are particularly vocal about their concerns about being judged by others in the classroom and wanting to really present their best self all the time.
That's interesting.
That's just me, that bit.
I see that one of our participants is unmuted. Was that intentional? Priscilla, did you have a question that you wanted to ask the speaker? I think it may not have been intentional then. Okay. Another question I had was about this interpersonal discomfort involved in role play, which I have to say I have some sympathy with. The idea of not wanting or feeling that it might be inappropriate to take on the role of the client. I was wondering if you could speak to that a tiny bit more.
Yes, this was actually a really big theme. I'm thinking about writing a separate paper about this, actually. And I feel that this is quite a change in what's acceptable for our students. So in a lot of these classes, we ask students to engage with a scenario and with a case, and to allow each other to practice. Kind of somebody has to take that role of being whoever it is in this scenario that you're playing. And students really started to feel like they didn't want to do that. I think coming from a place of this generation being very aware of respect for lived experience, kind of saying, well, I don't have that lived experience of, I don't know, being a person with dementia or having hearing loss or whatever it might be, and feeling that they were being disrespectful in playing that role. So in my subjects, we've started to redesign those tasks immediately, and where we use scenarios that are more connected to the learner now. Like, imagine you're having a bad day. Imagine you don't feel like participating in the therapy, so that they think about themselves rather than having to role play a certain condition. That's safer for them. And then we kind of are then separating out the work placement or the practicum experiences where they will get that kind of interaction with real clients and in the real scenario. But the classroom is so artificial in that sense that what we're practicing and giving feedback on in the classroom isn't the same as the practicum or placement is going to be.
Question from Karen here. You had talked about possible individual differences in students. Are there also individual differences in teacher or leader that impact on this?
That was something that we considered, absolutely. We had a number of teachers. It would be around, and one of the classes was larger. They had multiple demonstrators. I thought that there would actually be more of a cohort difference, Karen. I thought that the social work students might be a little bit different to the speech pathology students, to the music therapy students. The music therapy students had a little bit more anxiety, and we hypothesize at the moment that they almost have a double social anxiety impact, one from a more social perspective and one from a music performance anxiety. So they sort of have a double sort of layer potentially. So we looked at the cohorts, but there weren't any differences between cohorts, and that's where the most difference between instructor would have been as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking that some like leaders might be more kind of provide a more supportive environment and might be more kind of, I don't know whether that's related to practice or individual differences in personality, whereas others are kind of less supportive, and so that might have a knock-on effect with those students, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be that just the sample size isn't big enough to detect those differences first between the cohort. But we didn't have hundreds of classes with only 122 students. I think there were around 6 different classes within that sample.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting.
I had one more question just about the response rate on your survey. It was quite good. 28% is pretty high. Did you incentivize that at all in any way, or was it purely voluntary, just on the point of the students? Did you like offer a voucher raffle or anything like that, Grace, or was it purely just the survey?
We didn't offer an incentive. We went around, my research assistant, who is not a teacher at the university, went around to each class, and we actually, I guess because they're graduate students as well, it was a little bit different. We really talked about the fact that we wanted to do better in these learning activities, and we really wanted to hear your experiences. Now, that might have slightly biased the response rate to people who wanted to tell their stories of what was difficult for them, for sure. But we were amazed by the response rate actually, and how almost we had, obviously, I think it was like 136 responses, but a lot of really complete surveys as well, not sort of half finished surveys. So 122 complete surveys was pretty good. So we drew on altruistic motivation actually for improving the learning design in their classes.
That's fantastic. Were there any other questions? Anyone else in the room? If not, I will thank our speakers, Anastasia Umarova, Karen Lander, and Grace Thompson. Some really interesting presentations here. Great way to kick off the conference. So thank you very much for your contribution. And thank you to all who participated with your questions and your interest. Great session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully I'll see some of you in the next session, which begins at 11:45. Okay, thanks, everyone.